They came for mercy. They prayed for protection. But the walls of Blackwater heard only silence. Hidden deep in a pine-choked valley, far from the eyes of the Vatican, was an orphanage where faith was the first thing buried. No records remain, only the screams etched into stone. The trees here do not speak. They only lean in the mist-thick valleys of southern Appalachia, where the soil runs black and moss clings to stone like a second skin. The Sisters of St. Perdura arrived quietly and did not leave. They came not for peace, but to make it. And the land, in turn, watched in 1891. 10 women in gray wool habits stepped off a creaking wagon and looked up at the skeletal frame of what would become Blackwater Orphanage. It was still just wood and tar, wet from rain. The foundation had been poured weeks earlier, though the concrete had cracked. Almost immediately, they would call it sacred work. But the ground never agreed. The local parish had funded it, quietly. No records of benefactors. No letters to Rome, just a line item in a forgotten ledger. Sanctuary for the lost. Site 3, they chose the valley for its seclusion, the mountains for their silence, and the well, because it had already been. No one could say when the well first appeared. The nearby township of Emmeridge spoke of it as if it had always been there, a deep, circular maw of rock and shadow. It never ran dry, but no one drank from it twice. The taste, they said, was thick, metallic. Some said it burned on the way down. Still, the sisters blessed it, and built around it by October. The walls had gone up, birchwood, darkened by age before it was even nailed in place. A small steeple rose from the east wing, though no church was ever built inside. Instead, they carved a simple cross into the stone mantle above the central hearth. It was the only symbol of God permitted indoors. The rest was prayer in silence. Sister Miriam was the first to arrive and the last to speak. Her journal survives, though much of it is unreadable, water-damaged, edges burned. In her earliest entries, she writes, "We bring warmth, we bring light, we bring order to the broken." But her handwriting becomes smaller, tighter. By December, the entries grow sparse. On Christmas Day, the snow does not fall here, it hovers. The orphanage began to take in children that same winter. 4 girls from a fevered port town, 2 boys pulled from a workhouse outside Atlanta, a newborn whose mother never gave her name. They were quiet, almost too quiet. The sisters believed in discipline, of course, but they soon realized no discipline was necessary. The children obeyed without question. They did not cry in the night. They did not fight at meals. They folded their beds with mechanical precision at first. It was seen as a blessing. Then, uneased when Sister Agnes tripped down the stone stairs one morning, she expected cries of alarm. Instead, the children stood at the top of the steps, silent, watching. Not one moved, not one blinked. She would later describe their eyes as dead lamps in wet glass. Still, they prayed. Every evening, the orphans gathered in the dining hall, heads bowed. No one led them. They began and ended their prayer without instruction. Even the infants remained still by the second year. Word spread, not of miracles, but of order. A bishop in Charleston requested a visit. He was told the roads were flooded. Twice, the isolation became a theology of its own. The sisters began fasting more regularly. Silence was practiced not just at meals, but for entire days. Words, they believed, had weight. And in Blackwater, too many words might awaken. Something that no one spoke of the dreams. Sister Lenora, the youngest of the order, began waking with nosebleeds. Always at 3:07 a.m., always in the same hallway, the one that led to the cellar. The well had long since been covered, planks nailed over the mouth, a holy circle of salt drawn around the rim. But sometimes there was moisture, condensation on the floor, and the smell of copper dot when asked. The children claimed they had never been down there, but a pair of muddy footprints appeared every morning, always the same size, always facing the stairs. In the spring of 1892, a traveling priest named Father Beltham requested sanctuary at Blackwater. His carriage had broken down, or so he said. The sisters allowed him a room. That night, he did not sleep. He wandered the halls with a candle. No one saw him pray, but Sister Miriam's journal notes. He looked in every mirror, as if searching for someone not himself. In the morning, he was gone. His bed unslept in, his candle still burning. Only his crucifix remained. It had been snapped in half. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from no known parish. 4 words in red ink: "Stop digging the well." But they hadn't. Not since the day they sealed it, or so they thought. On a stormless morning, the kitchen was found flooded. Water had risen through the floorboards. Not from the pipes, those were dry. It came from below. When they pulled up the wood, they found mud. Thick, clotted, dark. The salt line had been broken by whom? No one confessed. But Sister Agnes began coughing blood. And the children? They started singing tunes no one had taught them. Latin hymns. Not from the Bible, from somewhere older. And still, the Vatican said nothing. The blessed beginning had already ended. They just hadn't realized it yet. Mist gathers low in the valley. It never rises. It only clings. The trees here are brittle, bending away from the center, as if something once pressed outward from the soil and stopped just before it broke the surface. Locals called it hollow land, not because it echoed, but because it absorbed in. The year before the Sisters of St. Credura arrived, a boy from Embridge wandered into the forest with a musket. He was 13, looking for rabbits. By dusk, he had not returned. They found him near the center, alive, but bent at the waist, curled on his side in the black mud, whispering to himself. When they lifted him, he screamed, not in pain. In protest, his words, when written down, didn't make sense. Something about roots that moved, and a door with no frame. He was blind in both eyes, but there were no wounds. Stories like this had circulated for decades. Farmers who couldn't plant, pregnant animals born wrong, limbs fused, skulls missing, spines inside out. Nothing grew straight here. Nothing bled normally. But when the sisters arrived, they dismissed the stories. Superstition, they said. Pagan nonsense. The church had sent them to bring structure, prayer, light. They did not come to listen to gossip. They came to drown it, and for a time it worked. Hymns echoed off the walls. Candles were lit daily. The well, sealed and salted, remained untouched. But the land did not forget. It began small. Patterns. The vines around the eastern wall grew counterclockwise. When pulled away, they returned to the same direction within days. Sister Lenora tried to burn them. The vines survived. Her fingertips blistered birds, once common in the hills, vanished completely. The air grew still. No rustle, no calls. Even the insects seemed to avoid the building. At night, the silence became unbearable. A kind of pressing quiet, so thick it seemed to choke. The sisters started praying longer, whispering psalms not for comfort, but to fill the space. By late spring, Sister Miriam began mapping the garden. She marked her herbs carefully, labeled rows. But every morning, the sprouts had moved, not trampled, not eaten, moved row by row. The shoots were shifted left, a full inch. Over 5 nights, her grid had reversed itself. She said nothing. She simply stopped planting, and then the animals began arriving. 3 deer, all dead, found on the west edge of the property. No wounds, no blood, but their eyes had dissolved, not rotted, dissolved. Sockets wet and clean. They buried them in silence. But the next morning, the soil above the graves had cracked, and nothing grew there again. The children were kept indoors, still obedient, still silent, but something had changed. They no longer looked out the windows, and the youngest, a boy named Peter, began drawing on the floor. Dust from the corners, ash from the hearth, always the same shape, a spiral with one break in, the circle. When asked, he said, "That's the hole in the song." No one knew what it meant, but that night, the humming began. It was faint, lower than the wind at first. They thought it was the floorboards or the wind in the rafters, but the sound came from below, beneath the stone, beneath the well, a low vibration, not rhythmic, not tonal, just constant. It stopped when they prayed, returned when they stopped. Sister Agnes stayed awake for 3 nights to document it. Her notes are still preserved. Humming begins at 2:11, ends at 3:20. Pulse-like, but inconsistent. My fingers ache. She tried to describe it further, compared it to breath, compared it to boiling, but every metaphor fell short, because the sound was not heard. It was felt. The floorboards trembled faintly. The pews shifted half an inch overnight. One painting, a faded icon of St. Michael, was found turned backwards. No one admitted to touching it. Sister Lenora began complaining of tooth pain, but her teeth were fine. The ache, she said, was in the bone behind her eyes. She would stare at the ceiling for hours, as if waiting for something to come down. The children had already stopped speaking by then. Even during meals, they chewed in silence, blinked less, smiled never. Their obedience was no longer a gift. It was a condition. And in the halls, the air thickened, not in scent, but in weight. Visitors described it as oppressive, like the inside of a chapel that had held confession too long. Then the roots broke through. One morning, beneath the chapel's altar, Sister Miriam found a crack in the stone, hairline, clean, and from it, a sliver of root, white, wet, pulsing faintly. She called for help, but when the others arrived, it was gone. And that's when she knew the land was not dead. It was waiting. For what? No one yet knew, but the humming never stopped. And the soil, once black, had turned red. The snowfall came early that year, heavy, slow, silent. By mid-November, the hills around Blackwater had turned to stone beneath the frost. The trees, once bare, now glistened with ice, frozen mid-bend, as if caught in the act of bowing. The sisters were not expecting new arrivals, not in the dead of winter, not after what the land had already taken. But on the morning of December 3rd, a horse-drawn cart appeared at the edge of the orphanage grounds. No driver, no sound, just the dull creak of wood on frostbitten mud. Inside the cart, 5 children, wrapped in soot-stained blankets. They came from St. Elia's convent, nearly 200 miles southeast. A fire had taken the chapel, the dormitories, and every sister in residence. No explanation, no witnesses. The letter attached to the children's coats was unsigned. It read, "We return what remains." The oldest was a girl of 12, pale, silent, with fingers red and raw, bitten from the cold, or something else. The youngest, not more than 4, was already drawing, scratching spirals into the carriage walls with a sliver of broken bone. None of them cried. None of them asked for food. Sister Miriam said a quiet prayer over each one, but her hands trembled. The children were bathed, given new beds, assigned new names. The church required order, but the names didn't seem to hold. The sisters began to forget them. By the second week, no one could recall who was whom. Not even the children responded when called. Instead, they watched. Not in curiosity, in awareness. And the youngest, the one who drew, had begun to hum. Not melodies, tones. Low, intermittent, always the same 3 notes, repeated in perfect sequence. No child that age should have held pitch that long, but no one corrected her. They only listened. Then the whispering began. Sister Lenora was the first to notice. She slept above the new children's quarters. At night, beneath her bed, a voice, faint, clipped, whispering in Latin. She assumed it was one of the girls, until she heard the voice again. Midday, while the children were at prayer, she recorded the words as best she could. Domus facta est e carne. The house is made of flesh. When she told Sister Miriam, the older woman grew pale, not in fear, but recognition. That phrase appeared once and only once in the private archives of St. Perdura. A heretical scripture, suppressed, never published. No one had spoken it aloud in nearly 80 years. and certainly not a child. They began watching the youngest more closely. But she did not speak Dot. She only drew Dot by January. Her symbols had become more elaborate. Circular forms, layered with straight edges and intersecting triangles. Some were found carved into the underside of her bed frame. Others scratched into the window glass. None of the sisters had seen them before. But one matched the pattern found in the cracked foundation stone beneath the altar. The one where the root had grown through. Still, the children were not disciplined. The order feared disruption more than disobedience. And soon, they would fear something else entirely. On the night of January 12th, a scream echoed through the southern wing. It came from the hall, sharp, guttural, human, but not childlike Dot by the time the sisters reached the corridor. It was empty. No signs of distress. No one missing. But at the end of the hall, in the alcove near the prayer niche, a single black feather lay on the floor. There were no birds in Blackwater. And then Sister Miriam changed. She stopped eating. Not from refusal, from forgetting. She would stand over her meals for hours, spoon halfway to her mouth, unmoving, her lips dry, her eyes unfocused. Then she began pulling at her scalp. It started with one strand at a time, gently, almost as if in thought. By the end of the week, entire tufts were missing. Her hands bled. She did not notice Dot when asked. She said only, "It itches from the inside." The Mother Superior ordered rest, confined her to her chambers, but the damage continued. Scratches appeared along her arms, deep, parallel, measured. The youngest girl was often found just outside her door, sitting, humming, watching Dot at night. The prayers changed. The orphans no longer said grace. They recited names, not biblical ones, not saints, unfamiliar syllables, no vowels, just sound. The sisters listened from behind the door. One recognized a phrase from an apocryphal text burned by the church in 1832. The mouth opens not with hunger, but to be fed. By mid-February, the humming had spread to the pipes, to the stone, to the walls. Dot at first, it was faint, like breath through reeds. Dot, and it deepened. Dot, and the earth beneath the chapel began to pulse again. One of the children, a boy, collapsed during Vespers. Blood from both ears. He lived, but never spoke again. The oldest girl was found awake each morning, standing at the window, facing the woods. Always the same position, always the same blank expression. She had removed all her teeth, carefully. None were missing from the dormitory. They had been arranged in a circle under her bed. Dot, and that night, for the first time in over a year, the humming stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Dot, because now it was listening. The bell tower was built without a clock. No gears, no hammer, no rope. Dot, just a frame of blackened timber and a single iron bell. Dot, it hung motionless. Always had. Suspended in still air above the chapel's south wing, not visible from the front of the orphanage. Only those who wandered too far into the garden saw it, and even then, it didn't draw the eye. The sisters never mentioned it. It had been there before them. Dot, according to building records, the bell tower wasn't part of the original construction. It didn't appear in blueprints. No ledger documented its addition, and yet it stood tall, narrow, leaning slightly east. Dot, as if something beneath it had shifted. For over a year, it remained silent, until the second Sunday after Lent. Dot, that night, just after 3 a.m., Sister Agnes sat alone in the reading room, praying quietly over the book of Tobit. A candle burned low. A rosary lay across her lap. She was not asleep. The sound, when it came, did not echo. It was sharp, close. The bell rang once. She said it was not loud, but full. A single toll, thick and slow, like it moved through water. She thought it might have been in her head, until the next night. It rang again. Dot, then silence. Nothing for 2 days. Dot, then on the third night, a second toll. This time, Sister Agnes stood beneath the tower and waited. There was no wind, no movement in the bell, but the sound returned. She described it later as not the sound the ears catch, but the bones. The next day, Sister Miriam placed a ladder at the base of the tower. She climbed alone. When she returned, she said nothing. She simply sealed the ladder in the cellar and locked the door. The bell rang again that night, and only those who had prayed that day heard it. The sisters began to keep records. Who had prayed, when, what was heard. Patterns emerged. Only the devout heard the ringing. Only those in a state of submission. And it always rang on the third night. Never two. Never four. On the fifth occurrence, Sister Agnes claimed to hear her name. Not spoken, not whispered. Carried in the ring itself. Agnes. Twice. A soft, stretched syllable inside the chime. She wrote it down. Filed it beneath her mattress. She would later say, it didn't call like a voice. It pulled, like a hand behind the heart. And then the dreams returned. The children, who had not spoken of sleep for months, began to cry at night. 2 boys, Samuel and Thorn, claimed the bell followed them into their dreams. Not the tower, just the sound. It came from beneath the beds, from inside the pillows, even when they blocked their ears. When asked to draw what they saw, both sketched a circle with a crack through it. The same shape found beneath the altar. The same drawn by the youngest, girl months before. Then, in early April, Samuel vanished. His bed was still warm, blankets in place, pillow indented, but he was gone. No footprints, no disturbance. Only his shoes, placed neatly beside the bed. Inside them, mud, wet, dark, coated with hairline roots. Sister Lenora searched the grounds for hours. She walked the stream, checked the cellar, even ventured into the woods. Nothing. But that night, the bell rang again, only once, and this time, everyone heard it, even those who hadn't prayed, even the children who had sealed their ears with wax. It shook the windows, cracked the edge of a candle holder in the chapel. And when it stopped, Thorn was missing, his bed still warm, shoes full of mud, but this time, footprints. Small, bare, leading from the dormitory into the chapel. They stopped at the altar, then vanished. The next morning, Sister Agnes collapsed. She was found in the tower stairwell, unconscious. When she awoke, she spoke only one word, over and over. Names she would not elaborate, would not eat. Her hands were clenched shut. When Sister Miriam pried them open, she found torn scraps of paper, corners from the prayer ledger. Each piece bore a single name. All 5 of the children who'd arrived that winter, and hers. The bell no longer waited for prayer. It rang every third night. And now the sound was spreading. Sister Lenora began hearing it during the day. In the pipes, in the walls, even in her own breath. The youngest girl, the one who never spoke, stood in the garden beneath the tower for hours. She stared up, smiled. And without moving her lips, mouthed, "It knows your name too." That night, the sisters took turns watching the dormitory. They lit candles, placed salt across the doors. But it did not matter. By morning, another child was gone. This time, without shoes. And in the hallway, outside his room, a single black feather, still warm to the touch. The bell rang that night, but no one was left to listen. The western wing hadn't been entered in weeks. The windows were blackened, the wood inside stripped bare by flame. What once held beds, curtains, and children's shoes was now nothing but char and silence. No one spoke of the fire. There had been no thunder, no lightning. No candle left unattended. And yet, on the morning of May 17th, the western dormitory had burned. Not the whole building, just that wing. The walls remained standing, scorched, yes, but intact. The beds? Ash, melted springs. Sheets fused to soot. But the flames had moved with purpose. Every item burned evenly, cleanly. Nothing was spared, except the small stone table near the back wall, and the thing that sat upon it, a journal. The sisters found it during a reluctant inspection, 2 days after the blaze. The air still smelled of smoke and old oil. Nails curled from the beams. Glass crunched beneath their boots. And there, on the untouched table, a leather-bound book, Not just unburned, untouched, its surface was cold. No soot, no damage dot, no name. On the cover, no cross. Just a red thread that tied it shut. Dot's sister Miriam was the one who opened it. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from something older. Something that remembered what the skin had not yet seen. Dot inside. Only one entry. Dot no date. No title. A single line, written in blood-red ink. They are not orphans. They were offered. Number. Signature. No explanation. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, not feminine. The ink had not bled, despite the heat. The sisters brought the book to the chapel, placed it on the altar, read the words aloud, but they did not pray. They argued. Who wrote it? When? Was it left before the fire? Or after? No one admitted seeing it before. No one admitted writing it. Sister Lenora asked the question that lingered in every mind. Offered? To what? And that's when Sister Agnes stepped forward. She said nothing, just walked to the altar, stared at the journal, and began weeping. Not loud, not mournful. Just weeping. She did not explain. But later that night, she left her bed, walked barefoot into the snow-covered garden, and began digging with her hands. The sisters found her an hour later, fingers raw, nails torn. A shallow pit beside the bell tower, half a foot deep. Inside it, nothing, just soil. But when they brought her inside, she muttered 4 words. They knew our names. The journal was locked in a trunk, buried beneath the floorboards of the reading room. But from that night forward, no one used the room again. The air in it changed, grew humid. Still, the candles burned shorter. The walls grew damp. And the bell rang. Earlier than expected. Not on the 3rd night, but the 2nd, when Sister Lenora opened the journal again weeks later, hoping to revisit the single sentence. It had changed. The red ink was still fresh, but the words now read, they are not offered, they are taken. The handwriting was different. No longer sharp, now trembling. Uneven, uncertain. A 3rd line appeared 2 days later. We let them. No one had touched the book. The trunk had remained locked. The key sealed in a sister's robe. But the entries continued. Short, always red, always overnight. Each line more direct. Stop digging. The ground remembers. Names are not yours. And finally, do not open the well. The well had not been spoken of aloud in months. The cellar door had been nailed shut. A ring of salt reapplied weekly. But now, it hummed again. Low, in rhythm with the bell, and then Sister Lenora disappeared. No scream, no sign of struggle. Her bed was empty, but her boots were still damp. Inside them, soot, not mud, not ash. Soot. Thick, oily, warm. The trunk holding the journal had cracked. The wood warped from within. They pried it open. The book was gone. In its place, a feather, blackened, curled at the tip. Still warm. And underneath it, in red ink scrawled on the inside of the trunk. She read it. The sisters did not speak. That night, no hymns were sung, no candles lit. They sat in silence, waiting. And as midnight passed, the bell rang. Once. But this time, there was no sound. Only the silence after. Too wide, too deep. And from the dark earth beneath the chapel, a breath drawn in, not exhaled. The mirrors were always cold, even when the sun rose across the eastern hills. Even when breath fogged the windows, the mirrors stayed cold. The children were never told to avoid them, but they did. Slowly, over months. By summer, not a single child passed the mirror outside the dormitory without bowing their head, not in reverence, not in prayer. In fear. They called him the guardian. It began as a whisper, a bedtime story shared between cots, then a drawing, then a silence. The sisters thought it was a phase, a child's game, but Sister Miriam noticed the pattern first. The sightings only happened when rosaries were missing. It wasn't theft, it wasn't neglect. They would simply vanish, from drawers, from doorknobs, even from necks. And on those nights, the mirrors changed, the glass darkened, not with shadow, with depth. As though the reflection were a pool, just shallow enough to see the surface, but deep enough to drown. The first to see him was a girl named Eleonora. She had been brushing her hair near the southern hall, alone. The mirror was cracked, but she watched anyway. She said he stood behind her. Tall, thin, dressed like a priest, but the clothes were wet, dripping, rotting. His face was blank. Not obscured, not blurred, just missing. Skin where there should be eyes, skin where there should be breath. She did not scream. She did not run. She dropped the brush and walked away. When asked, she would only say, "He waits to be remembered." Sister Agnes heard this and stayed up the next night, watching. She placed a rosary beside her lamp, sat before the chapel mirror. Waited. Nothing came until she blinked. And in that single instant, she saw movement. Behind her, the shape of a collar, the shine of wet sleeves, the faint scent of river mud, thick, metallic, and rotting from within. She turned. Nothing. But the rosary was gone, and when she looked back at the glass, she couldn't see. Not the mirror, not the room. It came from beneath the beds, from inside the pillows, even when they blocked their ears. When asked to draw what they saw, both sketched a circle with a crack through it. The same shape found beneath the altar, the same drawn by the youngest girl months before. Then, in early April, Samuel vanished. His bed was still warm, blankets in place, pillow indented, but he was gone. No footprints, no disturbance, only his shoes, placed neatly beside the bed. Inside them, mud, wet, dark, coated with hairline roots. Sister Lenora searched the grounds for hours. She walked the stream, checked the cellar, even ventured into the woods. Nothing. But that night, the bell rang again, only once, and this time, everyone heard it, even those who hadn't prayed, even the children who had sealed their ears with wax. It shook the windows, cracked the edge of a candle holder in the chapel. And when it stopped, Thorne was missing. His bed still warm, shoes full of mud, but this time, footprints. Small, bare, leading from the dormitory into the chapel. They stopped at the altar, then vanished. The next morning, Sister Agnes collapsed. She was found in the tower stairwell, unconscious. When she awoke, she spoke only one word, over and over. Names she would not elaborate. Would not eat. Her hands were clenched shut. When Sister Miriam pried them open, she found torn scraps of paper, corners from the prayer ledger. Each piece bore a single name. All 5 of the children who'd arrived that winter, and hers. The bell no longer waited for prayer. It rang every third night. And now the sound was spreading. Sister Lenora began hearing it during the day, in the pipes, in the walls, even in her own breath. The youngest girl, the one who never spoke, stood in the garden beneath the tower for hours. She stared up, smiled. And without moving her lips, mouthed, "It knows your name too." That night, the sisters took turns watching the dormitory. They lit candles, placed salt across the doors, but it did not matter. By morning, another child was gone. This time, without shoes. And in the hallway, outside his room, a single black feather, still warm to the touch. The bell rang that night, but no one was left to listen. The western wing hadn't been entered in weeks. The windows were blackened, the wood inside stripped bare by flame. What once held beds, curtains, and children's shoes was now nothing but char and silence. No one spoke of the fire. There had been no thunder, no lightning. No candle left unattended. And yet, on the morning of May 17th, the western dormitory had burned. Not the whole building, just that wing. The walls remained standing, scorched, yes, but intact. The beds? Ash, melted springs. Sheets fused to soot. But the flames had moved with purpose. Every item burned evenly, cleanly. Nothing was spared, except the small stone table near the back wall, and the thing that sat upon it, A journal. The sisters found it during a reluctant inspection, 2 days after the blaze. The air still smelled of smoke and old oil. Nails curled from the beams. Glass crunched beneath their boots. And there, on the untouched table, a leather-bound book. Not just unburned. Untouched, its surface was cold. No soot, no damage. No name. On the cover, no cross. Just a red thread that tied it shut. Sister Miriam was the one who opened it. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from something older, something that remembered what the skin had not yet seen. Inside, only one entry. No date, no title, a single line, written in blood-red ink. They are not orphans. They were offered. Number, signature, no explanation. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, not feminine. The ink had not bled, despite the heat. The sisters brought the book to the chapel, placed it on the altar. Read the words aloud, but they did not pray. They argued. Who wrote it? When? Was it left before the fire? Or after? No one admitted seeing it before. No one admitted writing it. Sister Lenora asked the question that lingered in every mind. Offered? To what? And that's when Sister Agnes stepped forward. She said nothing, just walked to the altar, stared at the journal, and began weeping. Not loud, not mournful. Just weeping. She did not explain. But later that night, she left her bed, walked barefoot into the snow-covered garden, and began digging with her hands. The sisters found her an hour later, fingers raw, nails torn. A shallow pit beside the bell tower, half a foot deep. Inside it, nothing, just soil. But when they brought her inside, she muttered 4 words. They knew our names. The journal was locked in a trunk, buried beneath the floorboards of the reading room. But from that night forward, no one used the room again. The air in it changed, grew humid. Still, the candles burned shorter. The walls grew damp. And the bell rang. Earlier than expected. Not on the 3rd night, but the 2nd, when Sister Lenora opened the journal again weeks later, hoping to revisit the single sentence. It had changed. The red ink was still fresh, but the words now read, "They are not offered, they are taken." The handwriting was different. No longer sharp, now trembling. Uneven, uncertain. A 3rd line appeared 2 days later. We let them. No one had touched the book. The trunk had remained locked. The key sealed in a sister's robe, but the entries continued. Short, always red, always overnight. Each line more direct. Stop digging. The ground remembers. Names are not yours. And finally, do not open the well. The well had not been spoken of aloud in months. The cellar door had been nailed shut. A ring of salt reapplied weekly. But now, it hummed again. Low, in rhythm with the bell, and then Sister Lenora disappeared. No scream, no sign of struggle. Her bed was empty, but her boots were still damp. Inside them, soot, not mud, not ash. Soot. Thick, oily, warm. The trunk holding the journal had cracked. The wood warped from within. They pried it open. The book was gone. In its place, a feather, blackened, curled at the tip. Still warm. And underneath it, in red ink scrawled on the inside of the trunk. She read it. The sisters did not speak. That night, no hymns were sung, no candles lit. They sat in silence, waiting. And as midnight passed, the bell rang. Once. But this time, there was no sound. Only the silence after. Too wide, too deep. And from the dark earth beneath the chapel, a breath drawn in, not exhaled. The mirrors were always cold, even when the sun rose across the eastern hills. Even when breath fogged the windows, the mirrors stayed cold. The children were never told to avoid them, but they did. Slowly, over months. By summer, not a single child passed the mirror outside the dormitory without bowing their head, not in reverence, not in prayer. In fear. They called him the guardian. It began as a whisper, a bedtime story shared between cots, then a drawing, then a silence. The sisters thought it was a phase, a child's game. But Sister Miriam noticed the pattern first. The sightings only happened when rosaries were missing. It wasn't theft. It wasn't neglect. They would simply vanish from drawers, from doorknobs, even from necks. And on those nights, the mirrors changed. The glass darkened, not with shadow, with depth. As though the reflection or a pool, just shallow enough to see the surface, but deep enough to drown. The first to see him was a girl named Eleonora. She had been brushing her hair near the southern hall. Alone, the mirror was cracked, but she watched anyway. She said he stood behind her, tall, thin, dressed like a priest, but the clothes were wet, dripping, rotting. His face was blank, not obscured, not blurred, just missing. Skin where there should be eyes, skin where there should be breath. She did not scream. She did not run. She dropped the brush and walked away. When asked, she would only say, "He waits to be remembered." Sister Agnes heard this and stayed up the next night, watching. She placed a rosary beside her lamp, sat before the chapel mirror, waited. Nothing came until she blinked. And in that single instant, she saw movement. Behind her, the shape of a collar, the shine of wet sleeves, the faint scent of river mud, thick, metallic, and rotting from within. She turned. Nothing, but the rosary was gone. And when she looked back at the glass, she couldn't see. Not the mirror, not the room, only light. Too bright, too sudden. By dawn, Sister Agnes was blind, not from trauma, not from illness. Her eyes were clean, undamaged, but they no longer received the world. She said, "He showed me where he stands." And when asked what she meant, she said nothing, because that night she stopped speaking. The children grew quieter after that. One boy, age 9, drew the guardian on the underside of his mattress. A charcoal figure with 2 long arms and an empty space where the face should be. Above the drawing, written in smudged lines, "Don't say his name." But no name had been spoken. Not yet. Sister Miriam began marking when rosaries vanished. She tracked each incident. 10 in 3 weeks. Always preceding a sighting. Always ending with something taken. First, a child's voice. Then a sister's breath. Then, finally, time. Whole hours lost. One girl stared into a mirror from 2:15 until 5:47. Did not blink. Did not sway. Just stood. When touched, she collapsed. Her mouth filled with river water. The sisters kept the mirrors covered after that, draped with cloth. But the glass still whispered. Not in words. In rhythm. A tapping, like fingers. Or teeth. The smell followed it. Earth, salt, rot. Only the chapel mirror remained uncovered. Too large, too heavy to move. And it was there that Sister Lenora saw him. She had not prayed in 3 days. Her rosary lost. She entered at dawn, knelt before the altar, lifted her head to the stained glass, and caught his form behind her, standing at the edge of the frame, half lit, leaning closer. She turned slowly. Nothing was there, but her breath frosted the air. And when she looked back, the figure had moved closer, not within the glass. Behind it, inside the mirror, the temperature dropped. The candlelight bent, not flickered, bent as though pulled toward something no one could see. She left the chapel at a run, collapsed outside. The hall whispered only one thing: he wants to be seen. That night, every mirror in the orphanage cracked simultaneously. A thin single break, running top to bottom. The next morning, the cloths had been removed. No one admitted it. No one could explain, but every mirror was exposed. Every frame, cleaned. And from the hallway glass, a footprint. Inside the mirror, pressed into the surface. Still, wet. Still dripping. No one prayed that day. No bells rang, but the scent returned. River rot, the stronger than ever. And from the dormitory, one child asked, "If he's the guardian, who is he guarding us from?" No one answered, because Sister Miriam was already gone. And in the chapel mirror, a second figure had begun to form, smaller, thinner, and this one had a face. The letters were written in silence, no ink blots. No tears. Just quill on parchment. Slowly, carefully, every line a plea, not for salvation, but for instruction. Sister Miriam sent the first letter in June, then another, then 6 more by midsummer, each addressed with precision, each stamped and sealed with the crest of Saint Perdura. They were mailed in secret, by candlelight, with trembling hands. Rome did not answer. For weeks the sisters waited. They prayed harder, fasted longer. Still, nothing. Until one morning in late July, a letter returned. It bore no seal, no signature. Just a single sentence. Cleanse it yourselves. No greeting, no scripture. No guidance. Sister Lenora read it aloud at evening prayer. The words fell like stones in water. The children did not look up. That same night, a man arrived. Not by road, not by cart. They found him at the gates at dawn. Standing, silent, in full black, a priest's cassock, leather shoes cracked at the soles, hands wrapped in cloth, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He gave no name, offered no credentials. He simply handed Sister Agnes a sealed envelope. Inside, a forged Vatican letter, language correct, Latin flawless, seal convincing. But the signature? It belonged to a cardinal who'd been dead for 4 years. Still, they let him in. They were desperate. The priest asked no questions. He did not bless the children, did not offer mass. Instead, he asked to be taken to the well. It hadn't been opened in months. The salt ring remained unbroken, the humming stronger than ever. He knelt beside it, listened, placed his ear against the stone, and said, "It's not hungry, it's waiting." Then he began his work. The sisters watched. From windows, from doorways, he placed objects around the property. Not relics, not scripture, but offerings. A box of sharpened nails, a bucket of lamb's blood, a spool of red thread, each buried at cardinal points, each marked with a circle carved into the soil. No prayers were spoken, no incense burned. He moved with purpose, not piety. The sisters asked if he was sent to EXORCISE. He replied, "There is nothing here to cast out, only something we let in." And then he smiled. Only once. It did not reach his eyes. The next morning, the chapel stank of meat, rotten, wet, a scent they had smelled before. In the front pew, a wooden cross, wrapped in strips of raw flesh. Bound with twine, placed gently. Beside it, a note, written on black parchment. "You are the last ones God will hear." The priest was gone. No carriage marks on the road, no footprints in the garden. His room untouched. The crucifix in the hallway had been turned upside down, not twisted, not forced, unscrewed, hung. With care, the sisters unwrapped the meat from the wooden cross. Inside the folds, something harder. Teeth. Small, human, filed at the tips. 12 of them. When Sister Agnes touched the wood, her hands blistered. They wept pus. She said she saw a face in the grain, not Christ, not a saint, a child, mouth open, as if screaming underwater. The letter was shown to the remaining children. They did not cry. One boy, the last of the 5 orphans, traced his finger along the word last, then whispered, "He told me already." Sister Lenora burned the letter, buried the ash in salt, but the words remained, scratched into the walls of the reading room the next morning. Exactly the same, letter for letter. "You are the last ones God will hear." The chapel bell rang that night. Not at midnight, not at dawn. At 3:3. It rang 13 times. No one heard it, but the candles in every room flickered out at once. And in the silence that followed, a sound like breath drawn backwards. The crucifix in the front hall began to bleed. From the eyes, from the wood grain. Thin trails of dark liquid, not red, not black. Gray. The color of bones soaked too long in river water. The sisters gathered the remaining children, locked the dormitory, lit every candle, but they could feel it now. The shift, not from outside, from within. One sister began to speak in tongues. Another forgot her own name. And that night, the mirrors went dark. Not cracked. Not fogged. Dark. Like something on the other side had turned away. Waiting. Watching. For the final prayer to be spoken. The last voice. The last word. The last ones. God will hear. It began with the birds. Or rather, the lack of them. The sky held its breath. Still. Colorless. No pinks. No oranges. No blue. Just a heavy, dark gray that pressed low against the hills. The horizon missing. As if swallowed. At first, the sisters assumed the hour was earlier than expected. The clocks inside the orphanage had stopped again. Hands frozen at 4:09. They wound them. Checked the candles, but the light never came. October 3rd, 1897. The day the sun did not rise over Blackwater, 7:15 a.m. Sister Lenora opened the east-facing shutters. There was no light, only a flat, grainy dusk, like ash suspended in fog. The air was still warm, but every tree outside had bent. Not swayed, bent toward the orphanage. Every branch, every limb, as though pulled forward. Sister Agnes checked the chapel windows. The stained glass filtered nothing. What should have been sunlight was just dark, a sick, internal kind of dark. The children refused breakfast. Some stood at their windows, eyes wide, mouths parted, not speaking. One boy pressed his hand to the glass and whispered, "It's folding." The sisters gathered the children in the chapel. Hymns were sung, softly at first, then louder. But something was wrong. The acoustics had changed. The walls no longer carried sound. Voices fell flat. Even the organ felt damp. Keys stuck. Notes sagged and pitched. And halfway through the Ave Maria, the youngest girl began to scream. It was sudden, shrill. Her eyes rolled back, hands to her ears. She clawed at her own face. Then another child, and another, until the chapel echoed with the sound of 20 screaming children. But outside, the world remained still. Several miles from the orphanage, local farmers looked toward the mountain. They saw fire, not flame, a glow, moving behind the tree line, pulsing, slow, but there was no smoke. No scent. And when they rode toward it, it vanished. The trees remained, bent toward the chapel. The wind did not blow. The air did not stir. Inside, Sister Miriam collapsed during prayer. She fell forward onto the altar, face pressed to the wood. When they lifted her, her skin had blistered. In the shape of a handprint, but it was upside down and not hers. At 10:42 a.m., the candles went out. Everyone. Simultaneously. Even the ones that had just been lit, even the ones behind glass. The darkness that followed wasn't full. It flickered, not like fire, like water. As though the chapel were submerged. Children cried now, openly, loudly. But when Sister Lenora attempted to lead a prayer, her voice failed. Not broke. Stopped. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged, not even breath. She clutched her throat, began to bleed from her nose. One child claimed he saw something behind her, a figure, long, slender hands. Over her mouth. No face, the same as the one seen in mirrors. But this time, not in reflection. It stood behind her. Then was gone. By noon, 3 children had vanished, not from rooms, from groups. One moment seated, the next empty space. No footsteps, no breeze, just a faint sound, like a match being struck underwater. In the halls, walls began to drip. Not with water, not with blood. With wax. Heavy, gray wax. It slid slowly down the corners, streaking paint, coating icons. The eyes of every saint in the orphanage appeared to weep. Tears, long, waxen, hardened mid-fall. The figures grew heavier. One cross fell, then another. By 2 p.m., half the building had gone silent. Not quiet. Silent, no echo, no footfall. Voices failed there. Not by choice, by design. Sister Agnes tried to leave. She opened the front door. Found nothing. Not the yard. Not the path. Just dark. Thick. Close like velvet. Not black. Not void. Something else. It hissed when touched. Pressed against her like steam. She closed the door. Whispered only, "We're inside it." By evening, the trees had moved closer. Their trunks now touched the walls. Branches scraped the roof. Roots curled beneath the floorboards. One sister swore she heard singing. Not in Latin. In something older. Slower. Carved more than spoken. Sound like bones humming. The bell rang once, without force, without movement. Just a single tone. Sharp. Wet. Then nothing. The children no longer spoke. They lay in rows on the chapel floor. Eyes closed. Hands folded. Like they were waiting for something they'd already seen. At 6:19 p.m. Sister Lenora lit a final candle. Held it above the altar. Watched the wax drip. And asked, to no one in particular, "Is this what the end looks like? When it chooses not to end?" No one answered. The candle flickered. Once. Then stretched. Sideways. As though pulled by a breath. From beneath the chapel. Then the floor. Creaked. Bent inward. And something rose from below. The trees around Blackwater never grew. Right. Even now, they lean where they shouldn't. Branches curled inward, like fingers pulled too tight. The canopy folds low. And the soil? It breathes, not visibly. But if you stand still long enough, you'll feel it. A pulse. Underneath the moss, underneath the stone, they sealed it in 1897. No survivors. No procession. No final rites. The building was razed. But not all at once. Brick by brick, quietly. There are no records of demolition. No city orders. Only a note in the diocesan archive. Structure no longer requires oversight. The bodies were placed in a single pit. Unmarked, unblessed, unnamed. A sister from a nearby parish visited once. She said the grass refused to grow, that she heard whispering just under the dirt. They dismissed her, called it grief. She stopped speaking 3 days later, not from shock, from choice. She entered a silent convent, lived 39 more years, never wrote, never broke silence. In 1936, the state sent a man to survey the property. He was new, young, fresh from training. He arrived with maps and a measuring pole, took a room at a nearby inn, promised to return by nightfall. He never did. They found his truck, doors locked. Inside, maps, a flask, and a copy of Psalms, open to Psalm 88. Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps. No footprints, no sign of struggle. Just one thing, a square patch of disturbed earth. 10 feet wide, fresh, but no rain had fallen in weeks. They left it alone. The locals already knew. They'd been avoiding it for decades. Hikers said the birds flew around it. Hunters said no deer passed through it. A child once wandered too close. She came home with dirt under her fingernails. And a new word, one no one taught her. Not in English, not in Latin. Something older, phonetically. Kazel. She whispered it in her sleep, over and over, until she stopped sleeping. In 1952, a camper from Tennessee pitched his tent less than 40 yards from the site. He arrived alone. No wife, no kids. Just a notebook, a lantern, and a pack of matches. At 2 a.m., he radioed park. Services. Said he'd found a hole, a round, dry pit, perfectly smooth. He described it as an eye with no lid. They told him to leave. He said he would. They never heard from him again. But 3 days later, he returned, not to the ranger station, to a church. Naked, covered in dust. He would not speak, not a word, not to doctors, not to clergy, not to family. He lived for 26 more years. Silently. Every day. He dug small holes in his backyard, filled them again, but one he never filled. And when he died, they found a wooden cross placed inside, wrapped in red thread, its base carved with a single phrase. I remember now. The land was purchased in 1998 by a small diocese in Louisville. No official reason, but witnesses recall a man of the cloth traveling alone. He carried a leather case and a single spade. He wore gloves. He said he was here for closure. He arrived on October 3rd. The anniversary locals watched him walk into the woods. He didn't return out the next morning. They found the beginnings of a trench deep, narrow, precise, 3 feet wide, 7 feet deep, no tracks around it, no shovel, and at the base, a rosary, threaded through the vertebrae of something not quite human. The trench was never filled, grass never grew. Rain avoided it. For the next 6 months, dogs in the region barked. At dusk, all at once, always facing east, a child from a nearby town claimed she saw children standing in the fog, all looking down, all mouthing the same word, offered. In 2001, a local historian mapped the site. He overlaid old parish records with satellite data. The pit, the exact center of the property, aligned perfectly with the position of the old well, the one that hummed. He submitted his findings. 2 weeks later, he suffered a seizure. Brain scans showed severe electrical disruption, localized to the language center. When he recovered, he spoke only in reversed phonemes. No therapy helped. But one word, when flipped, was translated by a priest. It. Read. Return. The ground at Blackwater still doesn't hold still. It bulges in winter, sinks in summer, and if you press your ear against the earth, there's a sound. Low, wet, continuous, like breath held too long. A priest returned in 2017. Quiet, careful. He spent only an hour there, but when he returned to his parish, he nailed shut every mirror in the rectory, refused communion, and wrote a final homily. It ended with one line: "They are not sleeping." Then he burned it, and himself. No graves remain at Blackwater, only earth that folds inward, only names that echo too soft to carry. But sometimes, on cold mornings, a mist rises that doesn't burn off, and in it, the faint sound of children, singing backwards. In Latin. And beneath it, under the hum, the sound of digging. The fog always comes first. It slides down the ridgeline in the final hours of night, thick and slow, like something deciding where to settle. By dawn, the entire clearing is drowned in it. You cannot see the tree line. You cannot hear the birds. Only the breathless stillness of the mountain and the faint, repeating whisper of a child's voice. Not loud, not panicked, just rhythmic, like a nursery prayer. But something about the cadence is wrong. The syllables loop backward, each phrase swallowing the last. Locals call it the hollowing every year. October 3rd, always the same. The fog arrives just before first light, and when it lifts, the candles are there, about always 40-7. Never more, never fewer, spaced evenly, standing where the orphanage once stood. No wax trail, no footprints. No wind. Just flame, steady, like someone had placed them with purpose. And everyone burns for 13 hours, then extinguishes on its own. The locals don't go near, but they watch from the hills. With binoculars, through drawn curtains. They say the flames never flicker, even when the wind picks up, even in rain. Some say they've seen shadows standing between them, small, still, facing the tree line, never moving. In 1979, a state trooper followed the fog. He said it was likely teenagers. Candles, after all, are not difficult to explain. He parked along the trailhead, walked the path alone. Radioed dispatch at 4:12 a.m., said he'd found something. Then, silence. He returned 4 days later, but only his boots made it back, placed neatly on the rectory steps. Inside, each a burned-down candle. No wax, no wick. Just heat-charred glass, still warm to the touch. In 1985, a journalist from Raleigh tried to debunk it. He camped overnight. Set up cameras, microphones. He never found the candles being placed. Just woke up surrounded by them, and one of His lenses was melted. He left that morning. Published nothing. But later, in an interview, he said, "It wasn't what I saw. It was what I remembered seeing." He died in a fire that winter. House untouched. Only his study burned. His body was never found. Only a page, torn from a hymn book. It read, "We are the ones left outside the prayer." In 2006, a drone captured infrared footage of the site. The candles glowed cold, not hot. Each emitted a dark, inverted halo. As if pulling light inward. The footage was deleted 3 days later. The operator claimed no memory of doing so, but in his trash folder, one file remained. A still frame, dozens of faint childlike outlines, not in front of the candles. Behind them. Arched. In prayer. In 2012, the Vatican was asked directly. A leaked letter surfaced, written in 1974, stamped confidential. It read, "Blackwater was never sanctioned. The land remains closed. No clergy may speak of what was buried." When pressed for clarity, the response was public. Simple. There is no record of any orphanage. But survivors remember. Old men with long silences. Women who won't pray near wood. One sister, now 94, has only spoken one sentence since 1947. She repeats it every October. The prayers weren't ours. No plaque marks the site. No signs. No roads. But the mountain still remembers. Each year, the moss parts. The stones shift. And the candles return. Once, a boy from a nearby camp stole one, snuffed it out, kept the jar beneath his bed. By morning, his mattress had burned through, but only in the shape of a child's hand, pressed into the coils. He doesn't sleep now. Not in beds. Only on floors. Only facing doorways. He hums at night. One of the same reversed prayers. The Vatican won't speak of it, but one unofficial document remains. A priest's journal from Zia, 1902. He visited the ruins only once. Wrote of the silence, of the weight in the air, of the heat under the ground. His final line was simple. God left the gate open, and something else got in. The page ends there, but below it, a fingerprint, burned into the paper. Small. Child. Sized. The candles continue to appear, and the fog continues to thicken. But now, the sound has changed. No longer a child's voice. It's layered. Chorus. Like. Still backward, still low, but more voices. Each whispering the same phrase. Again and again. Do not forget us. And those who stay too long, who breathe too deep, who listen too close, find that the words remain even after leaving, even after sleep, on the back of their eyelids. In the silence between breaths. A prayer not meant for salvation, but remembrance. Candles. In the fog. Each flame a name. Each year, one more added. One more voice in the dark.